So hello and welcome to our class today. So today we're going to look at the overview of forensic accounting, So we are basically going to look deeper into what is actually forensic accounting and how is it actually carried out. So when you talk about forensic accounting, basically, or a forensic audit, it is simply an in-depth examination and evaluation of a firm's or individual's financial information for use or evidence in the court. So when you say a forensic audit is being carried out, there's an in-depth examination, basically trying to investigate or evaluate a firm's or individual's financial information. So an in-depth examination of an individual or a firm's financial information, which will likely end up being used as evidence in a court of law. So this is maybe what could necessitate this forensic audit is maybe things to do with maybe a fraud. There's a fraud that has actually happened maybe in a firm, or a person has been involved in a fraud. He has maybe stolen money from somewhere in the government or somewhere from a company or somewhere. So as an individual, they basically try to investigate his financial information as an individual or a firm. So when the investigation is being carried out and evidence is supposed to be produced in a court of law, then what will likely happen to be able to unravel that particular fraud, an in-depth examination will likely be carried out, or to check into the financial statements of this particular individual or firm. We talk about financial information, for example, how does this particular firm actually realize its income? Is it in a straightforward way? Is it in a wayward way? Is it in a fraudulent way? So they look at the financial information of the firm, or maybe the individual. So this rule is basically actually involved just analyzing and reporting on data in a predefined context for the purpose of finding facts or evidence in the context of financial or legal disputes. So just analyzing data to do with the financial statements of the company, to unravel or come up with evidence that can actually be used in a court of law to accuse someone for having been involved, for example, in what we are calling a fraud. So when that in-depth examination actually happens, we say there's a forensic audit that is being carried out, and the end result is basically to get evidence to be used in a court of law, maybe to unravel a fraud that has happened in a company or as a result of an individual. So so this particular evidence that will be gathered after the in-depth analysis, then it can be used maybe in a civil or maybe criminal case in a court of law, criminal case in a court of law. So the nature and the purpose of forensic accounting. So forensic auditing is actually a bit broad, and a lot of activities will actually be involved in basically trying to carry out forensic audit. For example, this is what we are calling now forensic accounting. So forensic accounting is basically now the description of the wide range of investigative work which accountants in practice could be asked to perform. That work will likely be asked to perform as an accountant or as a professional accountant to unravel that particular fraud, that those procedures that are actually in place to unravel the fraud are the ones we are calling forensic accounting, or we are describing as forensic accounting. We are describing as forensic accounting. So the issues that will likely be investigated during the forensic audits, will include, for example, the suspects. motive of committing, for example, a fraud. The suspect's motive of committing a fraud. So they investigate what was the motive of the suspect actually being involved in committing a fraud. So whether the fraud has been carried out or perpetrated by several individuals, or it involved several individuals, whether the fraud involved several individuals, whether the fraud actually involved several individuals. That is part of what will likely be investigated. Then the comments, what comments were actually made will likely be made by the suspect. Comments made by the suspect. Comments made by the suspect during investigation. Comments made by the suspect during investigation. So they'll analyze those comments made by the suspect during investigation when interviews were actually being carried out. When interviews were being carried out to unravel the evidence. So this forensic audit can actually take can be approached in two ways. So number one, it can actually be either be reactive or proactive. So it can actually either be what you're calling reactive, or it can actually be proactive. It can actually be reactive or proactive. So reactive basically means that the investigation will be carried out when there's a report, or there's actually a report that has been brought before maybe the courts, such that this particular investigation should actually be carried out. So there'll be a reaction. So reactive audits are conducted when there is a reported allegation from various sources, such as previous audits, maybe the media, the public, or amongst others. For example, the media is basically alleging there's a fraud that is being perpetrated maybe in a government institution. So there'll be a reaction. So there'll be a reactive audit. So these types of audit can actually be carried out in order to prosecute a party for fraud, embezzlement, or other financial claims. It can actually also include situations that do not involve fraud or embezzlement, So when there's a reaction to maybe allegations, then that kind of an audit or forensic audit can term it as being a reactive audit. There's just a reaction on what has actually been alleged, either by the media, either by previous audits, either by maybe the members of the public. So there'll be a reaction maybe by the relevant bodies to be able to try to find out whether it is actually true or not. For example, if it is an official in the government who is being accused by the media of having been involved in fraud or embezzlement of funds for the government, in such a case, there'll be a reactive audit that can actually be carried out to try and unravel whether these allegations are actually factual or not. Then you have what you are calling proactive. So these are conducted where allegations have not been reported. So the initiative is actually taken even before allegations are actually reported. So you're not reacting to allegations. So that one can actually be termed as being a proactive audit. So it is conducted where allegations have not been reported, but where, for example, the Office of the Auditor General considers that there could be high risk of fraudulent activities in a given area. So if you suspect that in a particular area, there's a high risk of actually, for example, having fraud being perpetrated, then of course, as an auditor, or for example, the Office of the Auditor General in government can actually be able to be proactive and try to unravel or discover if there are any embezzlement of funds in such maybe government departments, or maybe it is just a normal auditor, maybe in a firm, in a particular department, to know whether there is maybe embezzlement of the firm's funds. So you take the initiative before even you get the reports that there is a fraud that is being perpetuated in a particular area. So you're saying the two approaches can be used. You can have reactive or maybe proactive. You can have reactive or maybe proactive. You can have reactive or maybe proactive. So how will this particular forensic audit actually be carried out? What are the procedures that will be involved in forensic auditing? What are the procedures that will be involved in forensic auditing? So number one, what will happen during forensic audit or the process of carrying out the forensic investigation? What the auditor will likely be able to do, or the forensic accountant will be able to do, first of all, is to accept the investigation. Fully acknowledge that he has the capacity, just to basically indicate he has the capacity or ability to be able to carry out the audit. So the process, so is the process of conducting the forensic audit. So the auditor will accept the investigation. By accepting, he tries to analyze whether he has the capabilities, he has the qualified staffs, he has the skills or experience to be able to accept such kind of work. So the forensic accountant must initially consider whether their firm or his firm has the necessary skills to be able to, necessary skills and experience to be able to accept the work. So because this is work that is specialist in nature and it requires detailed knowledge of fraud investigation techniques. And for example, being able to understand the legal framework in place to maybe unravel a fraud. So investigators must also have received training on how to interview and, for example, carry out interrogation or have what we are calling interrogation techniques. So when you talk about accepting at this particular stage, the forensic accountant or the forensic auditor should actually be able to look at his capabilities, his experience. Does he have enough human resource to be able to carry out that particular kind of an audit? So that's what will actually happen initially if there is a forensic audit that has to be carried out. Number two is now planning for the investigation. After accepting, you plan now, planning for the investigation, planning for the investigation. So the investigating team must carefully consider what they have been asked to achieve and plan their work accordingly. So the objectives of the investigation team, for example, will actually include identifying the type of fraud. They should actually be able to identify the type of fraud that has actually been alleged or is being carried out. Identifying the fraudsters, so they should be able to identify the fraudsters. Quantifying the financial loss that has actually occurred as a result of the fraud, maybe with the stealing of products in a company at the store. So they should actually be able to identify who has actually committed this particular fraud of stealing products at the store and basically try to measure or actually evaluate or value that particular loss that has actually occurred as a result of stealing those particular products. They should gather enough evidence, for example, to be used in a court of law, because you are saying forensic accounting or forensic auditing is basically trying to unravel or come up with evidence that can actually be able to accuse someone in a court of law for having actually committed what you are calling a fraud, So they should actually be able to gather enough evidence that can actually be used in basically in a court of law. They can actually be used in a court of law. So you're saying that after accepting, then of course you have to plan on how the investigation will actually be carried out. So the investigative team must carefully consider what they have been asked to achieve and plan their work accordingly. So they should actually be able to come up with, like, for example, a schedule. At what time where should they actually be? Which are the key areas they must actually be able to target to unravel the evidence. So what will likely happen now after having planned your work is now to be able to gathering of evidence, gathering of evidence. So in order to gather detailed evidence, the investigators must understand the specific type of fraud that has been carried out and how the fraud has been committed. So the evidence should actually be quite sufficient enough to ultimately prove or identify the fraudsters or actually accuse them in a court of law. So the evidence can be gathered using various techniques. For example, what the forensic accountant can actually be able to do, he can test the controls to gather evidence which identifies the weaknesses which allow the fraud to be perpetrated. So he will be able to gather the evidence by trying to test the controls, and see whether, or try to gather evidence as to whether where were the loopholes that actually led to the fraud actually being committed. So using analytical procedures, so you can actually be able to gather evidence by using analytical procedures to compare trends over time or to provide comparatives between different segments of the business. So try to analyze maybe different segments of the business, maybe their performance over time, look at the trends, what has actually been happening, what could actually make maybe under a particular trend to have a different performance. So those type of analysis can actually be able to enable them to be able to gather evidence properly as to what might have actually happened. So applying computer-assisted audit techniques, for example, to identify the timing and location of relevant details being altered in the computer system. So for example, trying to identify if there's a system that is being used, computer system that is being used, try to identify if there are any alterations that have actually happened in the system that could actually lead to, or basically lead to, a loophole or perpetuating a fraud through the system. Carrying out interviews, for example, you can be able to carrying out interviews for those suspected, carrying out interviews on those suspected, or basically carrying out discussions with those suspected to having committed the fraud. For example, the employees of the company. So doing what we call substantive techniques, looking at the reconciliations, cash accounts, and reviews of documentation, of how documentation actually happens in the company, can actually be able to enable them to basically gather enough evidence. After having gathered the evidence, then of course he has to prepare a report. Now do the reporting. So reporting has to happen. So in this case, the client, or basically the person is carrying out the work on the work for, will likely expect a report containing the findings of the investigations carried out by this particular forensic accountant. So a report must actually be given after having gathered the evidence, or enough evidence to be able to prove that a wrong or a fraud has been perpetrated, So we are saying that reporting should actually happen after evidence has actually been gathered, because we are saying that the client, or basically the person who the auditor is carrying out work on his behalf, will actually expect a report is actually given. So the report will also discuss how the fraudster set up the fraud scheme. It will just indicate how the fraudsters set up the fraud scheme. How did they actually come up with the fraud scheme? How did they actually manage to be involved in the fraud that actually maybe led to a loss to the company? So the scheme and which controls, if any, were circumvented, which controls were actually gone against to be able to maybe perpetrate the fraud. So maybe they looked at the loopholes in terms of maybe the store not being locked. So that was a loophole to enable them to be able to steal goods from the store. So there were no proper controls or documentation in terms of goods leaving the store, maybe to the company's branches or maybe the company's outlets. So if there's no proper documentation, then that is a loophole to basically give a room for people stealing the company's items for sale. So a report will actually have to be given of how the scheme was actually crafted, who was actually involved in the scheme, which controls were not actually working to enable the frauders be involved in that particular fraud. Then after that, then if the evidence is needed before the court, then we'll have the court proceedings, or basically the evidence being produced before the court. So the investigation is likely to lead to a legal proceedings against the suspects. For example, in this case, it is a firm or a company. Once it gets the evidence that the fraud has been committed, then of course they can proceed and go ahead and actually bring a case or an action in a court of law to basically accuse or basically bring the person before the court to answer as to why he was actually involved in the fraud, or the fraudster to basically explain why he was involved in a fraud, and if the company has incurred any losses, then of course maybe the court could rule in the favor of the company that the losses actually be paid for by the fraudster. So we are saying, first of all, you have to accept as a forensic accountant that you'll likely be able to carry out the forensic audit by being able to look at your experience or maybe your capabilities as an auditor. Can you actually be able to carry out this kind of forensic audit or forensic investigation? After that, you plan yourself on how you'll be able to carry out the investigation. Maybe come up with schedules, come up with the key areas in the company that you'll likely be able to look into to gather your evidence. Where exactly will you actually be able to hit? What items or what documents will you actually be able to require for you to be able to carry out the forensic audit? Then gathering evidence. After that, after you plan yourself, you now have to gather evidence, because this one basically is ultimately what you'll be looking for as a forensic auditor, to be able to press someone in a court of law. If you have enough evidence, that's when basically you can bring proceedings in a court of law, accuse someone in a court of law, so that the company can actually be able to recover. So the expectation of the client basically would be for you to be able to gather enough evidence to press or basically to prove in a court of law that a fraudster has been involved in a fraud in the company. You've said that several ways can be used to be able to gather the evidence. Try to test the controls, see where the loopholes are. Once you discover them, then you'll basically know how you'll be able to approach on getting enough evidence or further evidence. Carrying out analytical procedures, do analysis of maybe the financial statements for particular periods of time, do analysis of maybe the performance of a particular division of the company comparing with the division of another company, can actually be able to tell you a lot of trends of what is actually happening in the company or the client's firm. Carrying out interviews or carrying out discussions with the employees of the company, so that you can actually be able to unravel or get more evidence of what is happening in the company. After that, after you've gathered enough evidence, then you do what we call reporting, or report on what you've actually been able to gather. If that is enough evidence, then the client can actually be able to use your evidence to press or basically prove that a fraud has actually been committed in a court of law, has been committed in a court of law. So we can look at the types of forensic investigations. So the types of forensic investigations. Types of forensic investigations. What are the types of forensic investigation? The types of forensic investigations. Types of forensic investigation. types of forensic investigation. So forensic accountant could be asked, for example, could be asked to investigate many different types of frauds. So it is useful to categorize these types into three major ones. You can categorize them into three major ones. So you can be asked to basically carry out frauds to do with maybe corruption, frauds to do with maybe corruption, or maybe number two, it can be misappropriation of assets, forensic investigation to do with misappropriation of assets, or actually it could be financial statements fraud, financial statements fraud, could be financial statements fraud. When you talk about corruption, it can actually either be conflict of interest, through conflict of interest, or maybe bribery. We can talk about bribery. Someone was actually bribed, there was bribery involved. There was, for example, conflict of interest. There was, for example, what we call extortion of money, extortion. So this corruption, we are basically saying corruption could actually be perpetuated in these ways: either bribery, conflict of interest, or maybe what you are calling extortion. So when you talk about bribery, it simply refers to dishonestly influencing one's role or position to receive something, at the same time promising something favorable to the party proving such a benefit. So dishonestly influencing someone by giving him maybe money such that he does not actually basically do according to his role as a person in the company. So the problem with bribery arises due to the fact that not always does one stand in such a position to offer anything. It hampers the interest and profits of the company when one acts beyond his authority. For example, if you end up acting beyond your authority as a result of bribery, then you could actually be involved in an act that you are not actually mandated to be involved in, and basically it can actually lead to what we are calling corruption. So dishonestly influencing, someone is actually dishonestly influenced in carrying out his roles or carrying out the work he has been given under any position. When you talk about conflict of interest, so this is where something is actually done with the intention to gain personal benefits, which is detrimental to the company, forms the objective of forensic audit. So conflict of interest is basically where, for example, a director of a company basically tries to undertake the role, or his firm tries to undertake the role of auditing the company. So these are conflicts of interest. In such a case, how do you audit yourself as a director of the company? That one basically can actually lead to what we are calling corruption, because you will not actually be acting for the best interest of the whole company. You are auditing yourself. In such a case, you won't be able to unravel what is actually required in terms of carrying out an audit. When we talk about extortion, extortion is taking a step ahead from bribery. Extortion involves the use of threats, force, or violence to extract money from another party or person. Using violence or force to extract money from a person by threatening him, maybe saying that maybe you can actually be able to kill the person. So this may be done on the pretense of protection money for small businesses. So get a scheme of cyber extortion. So just trying to threaten someone, threaten him, or basically force him, or violently force him. Through violence, you force the person or extract the money from a person. If you do such, then you say you have actually been involved in what you are calling corruption. So it can actually happen through maybe bribery, conflict of interest, or maybe extortion of money. So when we talk about misappropriation of assets, So assets of the company not being used appropriately, maybe by the directors or employees or those mandated to be able to protect or safeguard those assets for the benefit, for example, of the shareholders. So this basically involves asset misappropriation or using assets inappropriately. For example, being involved in what we can call theft of cash thefts, stealing money for the company. Cash is an asset to the company. Fraudulent disbursement of money from the company's accounts. Inventory frauds, for example, stealing the inventory of the company, misappropriating it, maybe by those who have been charged with the stores or those selling the products over the counter or at the outlets of the company. So misuse of assets of the company is using them inappropriately or not for the required purpose or for personal interests. For example, directors use the assets or motor vehicles of the company for their personal interests. We say they are misappropriating the assets of the company. So an investigation could actually be carried out to determine whether such is actually happening in the company, either cash theft, misappropriation of the inventory of the company, dispersing monies or assets of the company without being authorized or being allowed by those who are the owners or the shareholders of the company. So the last one, another type of forensic investigation that could actually happen in a company is what we are calling financial statements fraud. Financial statements fraud. So this is where basically the accounts of the company are not properly being reported. They are being reported with an intention, maybe not to reflect a true and fair view about the company. For example, ballooning the expenses of the company such that they are not factual, just to show that the company has not realized enough income. So if you balloon them, maybe as directors of the company by maybe colluding with the accountants, in such a case, it will basically lead to these financial statements that are being reported not being factual. So if you do such for your own benefit, such that you can actually take any extra money out of the income of the company, let me say you have actually been involved in what you are calling financial statements fraud. So that is what I mean by financial statements fraud. So we're saying that this work will be carried out by a forensic accountant. So among the key skills or core skills that this forensic accountant should actually be able to have, so there are two major skills. So skills of a forensic accountant, what skills should he actually be able to have? So they can be categorized into two. So you can have core skills or the major skills, core skills, and you can have non-core skills, what we call non-core skills. When you talk about core skills, so these are specialized skills in that area of investigation or specialized skills or knowledge in that area of investigation. For example, it is money laundering, then of course you have the skills or the knowledge. You have gone to school to be able to study how you can carry out an investigation for money laundering. If it is, for example, inventory misappropriation, you have the skills or abilities to be able to tell whether there is misappropriation of inventory in a company. So the core skills, for example, will actually include ability to critically analyze financial statements. You should actually be having that ability. For example, you are a qualified accountant, you can actually be able to analyze the financial statements. So that is a core skill before you can actually be appointed as a forensic auditor or a forensic accountant. So ability to grasp internal control systems of the clients, be able to understand very quickly what are internal controls, how should they actually be put in place. If you look at the environment of the client, how should he actually be able to set up his internal controls in terms of basically maybe how money moves, how inventory actually moves in the company. So proficiency in informative technology and computer network systems, being able to understand things to do with computers, because most of the clients you will discover that maybe they use systems or computer systems in carrying out their work. So you should actually be able to understand or have computer proficiency or some knowledge in IT or information technology. Knowledge of psychology, being able to understand the psychology of people, how they can actually react. If maybe you ask them a particular question, this one will actually give you the ability to be able to do proper interviews or proper investigative interviews to unravel more evidence from the company or the client's environment. So an in-depth understanding of fraud schemes. So you should actually be able to understand fraud schemes very properly, how they can actually happen, how money laundering can actually happen, how does it actually start, what are the loopholes that can actually lead to money laundering or maybe bribery or corruption in a company. So those are some of the core skills. Another one maybe you can actually be able to mention, the last one is interpersonal skills or communication skills, which can actually aid in acquiring information about the company's ethical policies and assist forensic accountants to conduct interviews and obtain crucial needed information. So also being able to have a command of criminal and civil cases or the legal system in the country under which you're operating as a forensic accountant. So the non-core, which are not actually really major, but they're important for you to have as a forensic accountant, is sound professional judgment, look beyond numbers and grasp substance of situation, have a sixth sense that can be used to maybe reconstruct details of past accounting transactions, then have a photographic memory, can actually assist you. You can remember things very fast. You can actually be able to connect so many things very quickly. Have curiosity and persistency and be very creative as a forensic accountant. Pay attention to small details. Pay attention to small details and be very observant and listen carefully. For example, when you are carrying out your interview. So those ones will be among the non-core skills that can actually be able to enable you. And this one mostly will actually come out as a result of maybe your personality. There's your personality, but you can still improve on them from time to time to enable you to be able to carry out a forensic audit or do your work as a forensic accountant, as a forensic accountant, as a forensic accountant. So I think that's what you need to be able to know about forensic accounting or forensic auditing. You'll be able to look at what it means. We've looked at what will actually be involved in terms of the steps. We've looked at how you can actually be able to gather the evidence, how you actually be able to gather the evidence, and eventually what are the core skills you must actually have as a forensic accountant or a forensic auditor. So with that, we have come to the end of this particular lesson, and we will meet in the next lesson where we'll be learning more, maybe finalize on this topic of forensic accounting or forensic auditing, forensic accounting or forensic auditing.